Welcome back, honors. All right, welcome back to it. Welcome back to where we stopped off in class, where we talked about the flight to Varennes, right? The last thing I remember telling y'all was that spotting with Louis' face on a coin, and then they got arrested and all this other stuff, and the remaining bit of their popularity was completely destroyed by this failed attempt to try and run away and leave France, right? Isn't that bananas that they would try to do that? Why would you do that, dude? Why would you do that? Like, that sounds like a terrible idea. Why don't you just sign some stuff and not be a jerk, and then you don't have to worry about the revolution so much? But now you're screwed over because in the long run, the people of France hate you, and they're going to eviscerate you in the press and stuff like that. Even when the king and the queen actually returned back, they, in the long run, were being, like, had rocks thrown in their carriage and stuff like that. But I'm getting ahead of myself, right? Welcome back, honors. Happy Mardi Gras, right? This is the first of your 2 flips that you're going to need to complete for this unit, and we are picking up right where we left off in class at the flight to Varennes, right? The flight to Varennes, that failed escape attempt. But yeah, that terribly stupid failed escape attempt is going to dictate the progression forward of a lot of events that have to do with the French Revolution, right? So once their failed attempt went down, now the people of France are furious, right? The people of France are furious, especially the Third Estate, and they're beginning to organize themselves in a little bit of a weird way and show their fury, right? Because at the very beginning of the revolution, the bourgeois were the ones leading, right? They used the mob of Paris to do most of their dirty work for them, and the bourgeois would be like, oh, poor people, go storm the Hotel des Invalides and get your guns and then go burn down the Bastille, right? Yay, poor people, good job, right? So and of course, the Marquis de Lafayette was now leading the National Guard, but at this point, the mob of Paris is starting to feel slighted. The failed flight and the failed escape attempt of the royals has now increased the aggression and anger of the mob of Paris, and they demand violence, immediate action, and a bunch of them want no more king. They want nothing to do with Louis and his family anymore, and they would rather see him dead than be in charge anymore, right? So the big thing that ends up happening is you had the rise of these people known as sans-culottes, right? So the sans-culottes members are going to become the violent aggressors during the French Revolution, who are going to basically be the Third Estate, the urban workers and the rural peasants, not the bourgeois that are furious, so furious at the crown that they are beginning to demand that things change, and they are beginning to demand things like bread, equality, and immediate action, right? They are the organized mob members. They are the radical revolutionaries. They want blood in the streets. They want the death of the rich. They want immediate reaction. They want fire, flames, and brimstone, right? They don't want constitutions and liberal work. They want everything now, and they want immediate solutions, right? They love violence, and they love things that are done quickly, right? Now, let's break down the name of the word real fast. Sans-culottes. What's that mean? It means without pants, right? So, now, looking at these 3 guys, it's very, very obvious that they did actually have pants, right? They're not running around Winnie the Pooh in it or anything like that during the middle of the French Revolution. The reason why they called themselves sans-culottes is because they wore pants like these that fit a little more loose, that were meant for working men. They wore trousers. They did not wear breeches, right? And breeches were tight pants that rich people wore, right? So basically they're saying, we are the poor, angry mob of Paris, and we expect things to get done now, right? So things are getting crazy. You now have roaming bands of poor people that are all freaking out. And on top of everything else, you have clubs rising up, right? And I don't mean clubs like this, right? I don't mean clubs where you're all standing around going not clubs like that, okay? Not that kind of club. I'm talking about this kind of club, right? The club I'm talking about is secret societies are now popping up, right? These secret societies of bourgeois members and former nobles are starting to pop up being like, how do we use the sans-culottes to our advantage? Should we have a king? Should we not have a king? Should we have a legislative republic? What should we do, right? So the clubs that are popping up are very distinctive in goal and very distinctive in also the way they want to get things done. The 2 biggest clubs that pop up, one is known as the Jacobins, right? So the Jacobins or the Jacobins, right? So depending on how you want to pronounce it, right? Now the Jacobins, though, are the radical ones, the violent ones, and they love the sans-culottes and the things that they do, right? Now, for example, the Jacobins actually used the sans-culottes at a very, very famous event known as the Champs de Mai massacre, right? Where basically they told all the poor sans-culottes members to show up inside of the square and demand a referendum to have Louis actually deposed as king and to take him down and to have the monarchy abolished. And Marquis de Lafayette had to show up at that event against the Jacobins and the sans-culottes and fire into the crowd to get them to leave after some of them shot at him, right? So, like, it's a very, very aggressive club that's being started. The Jacobins are crazy. They're intense. They're radical. They're violent. And they love the sans-culottes and the fact that they want blood in the streets, too, right? Then you got the other ones, the Girondins, right? The Girondins, as they're also called. They are moderate. They try to resist violence whenever they can. And they want political ends to the revolutions. The Girondins want constitutions. They want acts. They want bills of rights. They want things like that. They want basically to keep Louis in power, but not truly in power. They want a limited monarch that they have in Great Britain, right? So the idea is to create a nice, smooth end to the revolution. Basically, in a nutshell, the Girondins would say that the revolution ended whenever, like, Louis ended up back in Paris. The whole thing about it, when we're really looking at all this, the sans-culottes getting organized, the rise of the clubs, everything getting intense, people dying left and right, is mostly Louis' fault for trying to run away, right? So, like, because if he didn't try to run away, he wouldn't have actually created all these problems, right? Because it was obvious that his intention was going to be to return with an Austrian army and destroy the revolution, right? So thanks a lot, Louis. You led to this, right? You led to two groups of people, the Jacobins and the Girondins. One of them wants you dead, and the other one wants you to basically be a figurehead monarch that has no real power. Way to go, big fella. What are you thinking, right? So, like, now, going into it, though, these three guys are very, very important when it comes to one of the clubs in particular, because they're the three most dominant and important figureheads, right? They go with the Jacobins, or the Jacobins, right? These three guys are very, very important. Go ahead and write them down. First and foremost, we have Jean-Paul Marat, who is the guy right here in the middle. He's the dude that lived in the sewer, the one that wrote that article that led to the Women's March, that he wrote that very, very famous, what, sewer? So, like, the big thing about it, though, is he's that guy that had to, like, literally live in the bathtub for 6 hours a day because of the skin condition that he contracted. And he also wrote that famous, like, newspaper called La Émue des Peuples, which means the friend of the French people, right? That's Jean-Paul Marat, or Marat, as, like, a lot of people like to call him, because it's Marat, sewer guy. That's him, right? He's a Jacobin leader, but he's, like, the third in charge. The two guys that are super in charge are these two guys. One's name is Georges Danton. Danton is spelled D-A-N-T-O-N, as you can see right there, right? Georges Danton, right, spelled G-E-O-R-G-E-S. Georges Danton is going to be one of the main leaders of the Jacobin Club. He wants blood and violence, and he wants the nobles to be prosecuted for their crimes against the people of France from the very beginning of the revolution. He also insults the Girondins all the time. He calls them toads and frogs, and he hates them with a fury, right? Now, this guy over here, though, is the main dude. Get used to this face. Get used to this name. He's wildly important. Even my wife knows who this guy is because he's that big of a deal. His name is Maximilian. Do you know what his last name is, sweetheart? Huh? Do you know what the guy that, like, led the French Revolution in its most violent phase, his last name starts with an R? No. Yeah, you do. Robes. Robespierre. Say it louder for the people in the back, sweetheart. That's right, Maximilian Robespierre. She knows exactly who Maximilian Robespierre is because he is the most violent out of the three. Maximilian Robespierre is going to end up leading the French government at one point. He demands the death of people. This guy's actions led to the death of over 30,000 people in France, mostly by death of execution or dying in prison, right? So, like, Maximilian Robespierre is the most aggressive of the three Jacobin leaders, right? And you need to get comfy with him. He's soft-spoken, he has a meek voice, but he's still very powerful and very intense, and he is going to sway the tide.
Spoken in a mean voice. What did you mean by even my wife knows?
I meant even my wife knows, as in, like, my wife who hasn't been in school or learned about this stuff in forever, and you're the only person in here. If it were my cousin, I'd be like, even my cousin knows. So, like, don't. Sorry. My strong and powerful and amazing wife, who is a model of femininity and grace, as well as being beautiful, smart, and awesome. And her beauty doesn't necessarily matter because she's great. But feminism, rah, rah.
Do you want the gold medal for backpedaling?
Do I want the gold medal for backpedaling? I do want the gold medal for backpedaling. All right, anyway, now, so Maximilian Robespierre, get comfortable with that name. He's going to be very, very important later on, okay? So Maximilian Robespierre represents those guys, right? The Jacobins, the Girondins are the other ones, right? So all three of those guys, commonly, whenever they met in the legislative branch, were referred to as the Montagnards, right? Because they actually were, like, sat on these really high benches because the word Montagnard means the mountain, right? So, like, so since they sat, like, up above everybody else, they were called called the mountain. Now, the Jacobins, though, are going to be, we're going to kind of break down a good way to remember them, right? So you got the rise of these two clubs again. Jacobins, we sometimes call the Jerrys, because that's what they're a lot like. It's like that Tom and Jerry figure. Jerry is a pretty crazy mouse. He shoves that poor cat's tail into light sockets. He beats him with a frying pan. He's very mean. He's very aggressive. Whereas the Girondins are the Garys. They're like, meow, Constitution, meow, easy into revolution. Meow. Don't kill everybody, right? So, like, that's like Gary, right? Okay, so the big thing about it is the Jacobins and the Girondins. Remember those names. They're very important. Also, Maximilien Robespierre, Georges Danton, and Jean-Paul Marat. Highlight their names. They're going to be massively important as we go through this whole revolutionary period. Now, going forward, though, you also need to understand that revolutionary France is going to go to war. What are you doing? All right, so like, why would you do this? Why would you go to war? Why? Why would you go to war in the middle of a revolution? This sounds like a terrible idea, right? The reason why is because, remember, everyone else in Europe is under an absolute system, right? Everybody else in Europe uses a very, very strong and powerful king that actually controls and dictates the things that they do. Not France anymore. They have a constitutional monarch, much like the British do, and they are trying to have a legislative assembly and possibly even pushing towards a republic, which would be very aggressive when involved no king at all, right? So that's starting to freak out a lot of the other European monarchical states, especially Austria, Prussia, the remaining Holy Roman Empire. Some areas of northern Italy are starting to get really freaked out by the ideas of the French Revolution spreading into their country, right? They got so freaked out by it at one point that they even had this really famous declaration called the Declaration of Pillnitz that basically said to the French people, if you kill or hurt Louis, we're going to bring down the force of the entire European continent on top of you. And the French people are basically like, what do you mean you're going to try and go fight me? Come at me, bro. So, like, what ends up happening is the other European powers begin mobilizing in fear to try and stop the French Revolution. So the new French government organizes an army with the Marquis de Lafayette at its head, and they decide to declare war on Austria. They're like, you gonna threaten me? You gonna threaten me? But also they wanted more food. That's another big thing, too. Like, so because, like, during a revolution, you tend to run out of food. And so they wanted to go invade Austria to get some more food. All right, so now the big thing about it, though, is that you need to know is that revolutionary France is going to declare war on Austria, right? Which is very, very aggressive when you think about it. So now they're at a war, and this war is called the War of the First Coalition. Write that down. The War of the First Coalition. Write that down. The War of the First Coalition, because it's going to be very important, because you're going to have to know what a coalition is later, all right? So now look, but the big thing about it is, though, is now France is at war, okay? You're now at war with Austria, and everything's getting really crazy, and you're at the War of the First Coalition, and I could have just left it there because it was right there already. Now, so the big thing about it, though, is France struggled early, but eventually they came out in a massive underdog victory, right? Which is a big deal, because what is this going to do to French nationalism? What's it going to do to French pride in the revolution? What's it going to do to the idea that your revolution is right, just, and true? They're going to get so excited and pumped up that they are like, France is right. Revolutionary France is awesome. Let's keep this train going. And also, a famous guy actually got his first position as a military officer in the War of the First Coalition. That dude is Napoleon Bonaparte, right? Napoleon Bonaparte is fighting with the French Revolutionary Army at this point. He's growing a lot of clout. He's growing a lot of prestige. And a lot of people are starting to whisper his name around, being like, hey, that guy Napoleon, he's pretty...